The sun at noon hung over Arizona like a red coal someone forgot to put out. The wind swept down from the dry ridges, whipping yellow dust into the main street of Dried Creek, a strip of warped boards, a few tired storefronts, and a tin-roof saloon that groaned like an old man in a coughing fit. Out here, everything creaked. Doors, saddle joints, even bones. Only a man's heart, when baked long enough under this sun, went from soft to cracked stone and stayed that way. Ezekiel Turner led his ash-gray horse at a slow walk, sweat darkening his shirt across the back and chest. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and moved with the steadiness of a fence post hammered deep into hard earth. His skin was black as the desert night, the kind of black that in these border towns gave folks a reason to let their tongues run loose. He kept his hat brim low, so he didn't have to see the looks. The looks had already taught him everything. Walk straight, speak little, never turn around. The horse gave a soft huff. Zeke patted its neck, tied the reins to the hitching post outside the silver spur. Inside, the faint wheeze of a piano drifted through the air, tangled with the clink of glasses and the sour mix of cheap whiskey and cigar smoke, a smell that could choke a man's will if he stayed too long. Near the saloon's porch, a woman was crouched over a barrel, drawing water with a tin ladle. Her dress clung to a full-frame round shoulders, short waist, her black curls hastily pinned, stray strands tugged free by the wind. Her name was Clara May. Around here, folks had other names for her, the kind that stuck like burrs. She learned to hear them without looking up, like someone tying a bootlace just to hide a fresh bruise. "Careful not to dirty the water, Piglet," a slurred voice came from inside. Laughter followed, the kind that got louder the longer no one stopped it. Clara kept her head down. Her grip on the bucket's handle tightened until her knuckles blanched. Zeke walked past, telling himself not to look. In this territory, stepping into another's trouble could cost blood. And he knew those words too well himself, only they swapped Piglet for Black. Water sloshed onto the dirt. A boot nudged the bucket, splashing her skirt. More laughter. Zeke stopped, not because of the insult, but because Clara lifted her head. Her eyes were dark brown, deep and still as a dry lake, where the water's long gone and only stones remain. No tears. Just a small blue-green flame in the center, the kind you find in someone who's been burned before and decided they won't burn alone next time. "That's enough," Zeke said, his voice low and steady, like a stone rolling down a narrow canyon. 3 men on the porch turned. The bearded one spat into the dirt. "Mind your business, boy." Zeke's hand rested lightly on the butt of his Colt. He didn't draw. Didn't need to. Just enough so his own hand would remember it was there if things went wrong. Silence stretched tight as a fiddle string. The wind rattled the saloon sign, tossing the shadow of silver spur over a muddy puddle. The bearded man snorted, tilted his chin, and backed into the saloon. The other 2 followed, dragging with them the stale stink of cheap liquor and men loud when drunk but small when sober. Clara stood straight, water dripping from her hem. "I don't need your pity," she said, voice hoarse from the heat. "I'm not giving pity," Zeke said, eyes on the ground where the mud spread like dried blood. "Just don't like the sight of cowards' work." They walked in the same direction, toward the train depot. A narrow dirt road, lined with leaning fences, posts missing like old men's teeth. The wind slid through the tall weeds, making a whisper, like tired cloth. "How long you been here?" Clara asked, not so much curious as needing to speak to erase the echo of laughter from earlier. 2 years. Ranch work, fixing fences, sometimes drive cattle from dry season to wet, make a little extra," Zeke said, pausing a heartbeat. "You?" "All my life. My mother was Mexican and black. My father was white. He left before I could say pa. Around here, skin like mine just makes folks' mouths mean." Zeke nodded. Mean was a polite word. In Dried Creek, Tongues could cut sharper than a skinning knife. Night came early in the burn grass season. Zeke returned to the small room he rented behind the livery. The oil lamp flickered. Mosquitoes whined. He set his gun on the table, drew a whetstone, and worked the knife slow, steel on stone, in a rhythm like a calm heartbeat. Clara's eyes came back to him, not her dress, not the water on her hem, but that small green-blue flame. Morning. Voices outside rose into sharp edges. Zeke stepped out to see Clara at the grain shop, facing the fat, grease-stained owner. "I paid," Clara said, setting the sack of cornmeal on his crate. "Count it again." "Big shoulders eat fast. Guess you ran out," the man sneered. Passers-by slowed. A thin woman in a headscarf shook her head slightly. A boy with straw hair smirked. "Fat lady." The shopkeeper grabbed Clara's wrist, yanking her toward him. She stumbled, hissed in pain. Zeke stepped between them, his hand clamping the man's wrist. "Let go." The man felt the pressure like a vice. He wrenched free, muttered a curse, straightened his shirt, and backed away when he saw men watching. "Check your own ledger," he barked, retreating with a curl of the lip. Clara fixed her sleeve, without thanks, only casting Zeke a quick, sharp glance, part pride, part exhaustion. By late afternoon, dark clouds rolled in from the low hills. The saloon buzzed, but voices dropped when a card player with a beard muttered, "Red vultures spotted near the border. 3 of them, one with a scar down to his chin. Folks been dying in Yuma." Red vultures. Zeke had heard the name. Men who liked to watch others kneel before they pulled the trigger. Not hungry thieves. Killers who treated death like a keepsake to brag about. He left the saloon and found Clara on the church porch, holding an empty basket. Rain began to tick against the tin roof. The church bell was silent, tired from the wind. "Got fired," Clara said, eyes fixed on her shoes. "Said I scared customers. Doesn't matter how well I cook. They don't want to see me in their kitchen." Zeke sat beside her, catching the faint smell of cheap soap on her sleeves. "What now? I can sew, I can cook, but this face, this color, folks hire people, not eyesores." The wind carried the rare smell of rain hitting dry earth. Zeke thought of the small wooden shack he was fixing on the edge of town, just big enough for 1 person, or 2 with care. He stood, held out a hand. "Come on." "Where?" "Someplace dry. Let's say I need someone to cook dinner." She hesitated, then placed her large, soft, but calloused hand in his. "All right." His shack was plain, rust-pitted tin roof, 1 bed, 1 table, a small stove, window to the cactus patch. He gave her a towel, lit the stove, set water to boil. "People talk you're not afraid?" she asked. "I'm a black man living here 2 years. They've said everything. I ran out of space for fear a while ago." She rolled her sleeves, took a cast iron pot. "I'll make bean stew. No meat. So we'll add cornmeal. You got dried chilies?" He pointed to a jar on the wall. She nodded and set to work. The knife hit the old cutting board in steady rhythm. The smell of onion and chili and hot oil filled the shack, covering the damp scent of wood. When the rain came heavy, they ate to the drum of drops on tin. Clara sat straight, eating little. Zeke ate more, quiet. She glanced at the window now and then, like she knew something waited out there, and she was right. Clara set her spoon down, voice lower than the rain. "I've seen them before. In Yuma. My boss was shot. I was in the kitchen. Saw them through the crack in the door. I testified in court. Told them what I saw. They walked free anyway." Her spoon tapped the bowl thin, metallic like the sound of a hair snapping. "Now they're looking. And someone like me, easy to find." Zeke didn't say, "I'll protect you." Big promises weigh more than a man can carry. He simply stood, checked the latch, tested the hinges, drew the curtain. "Tonight, you take the bed. I'll take the couch. Tomorrow, we board the windows. You stay inside. Let me go out." Outside, the dry creek swelled with sudden floodwater. Desert rain comes without warning, hits fast, washes away what's weak, and leaves like it was never there. Somewhere far off, the thud of hooves mixed with the rain, slow, deep, like someone tapping a drum of hide. Zeke lay on the couch, eyes open, knife under the pillow, Colt within reach. In this land, sleeping and being ready are the same. He heard Clara turn once, bed creaking, her breathing settling. His gaze traced the rivets in the roof, a map of dead ends, except one, straight ahead. Morning brought a sky, the color of ash, the smell of wet soil still heavy. Zeke stepped onto the porch with coffee and saw fresh hoofprints in the mud, 3 deep cuts crossing the old ones. He crouched, touched the edge. Damp, not old, not new enough to steam. Which meant last night, which meant they'd been close, which meant they'd be back. By noon, word spread like fire through dry grass. At the Silver Spur, someone whispered, "Red vultures are asking about a big mixed-blood woman, curly hair. Heard she testified in Yuma." Clara froze mid-step, the tray in her hands trembling. Broth sloshed over her boots. She bit her lip, silent. Zeke appeared at the back door as if he'd been there all along, took the tray from her, set it down, and pulled her through the narrow alley. "They're after me," she said, as they moved through the shadowed gap. "I don't regret telling the truth, but I'm afraid." "Fear's no shame," Zeke replied. "It keeps folks alive. Courage is doing it while you're still scared." Back at the house, he set to work on the window's extra boards, extra latches, tiny bells strung outside so any touch would ring. Clara held the tape, passed nails, sometimes wiping sweat from his forehead with the back of her sleeve like someone who'd done such things for family before. That evening, 3 dark specks appeared on the ridge, growing into horsemen. They didn't tie up at the saloon this time. They came straight for the house. Scarface at the front swung down, boots hitting the dirt. "Hand her over," he called. "Alive or in ashes. You choose." Zeke opened the door, stepped out into the fading Sunday. "Get off my land." Scarface smirked. "Told you this morning. Tonight, we take her." The sun hung low, painting the tin roof blood red. The air went still, holding its breath. The first hoof step hit the porch like driving a nail into the thin wood between peace and war. The air between them held like a drawn bowstring. Zeke didn't flinch, didn't even shift his weight. Behind the thin walls, Clara sat with her back against the cold stove, every muscle, listening. Scarface took a slow step up the porch, boots groaning on the old boards. "You know what happens to folks who stand in our way," he said, his voice dripping with the confidence of a man who'd never been refused twice. Zeke's answer came quiet, steady. "And you know what happens to men who mistake my silence for fear?" For a heartbeat, neither moved. Then Scarface tilted his head, grinning like he'd just read the last line of a joke only he understood. "We'll see you at dawn." The red vultures turned their horses without another word. Hooves struck sparks off the packed dirt as they rode back toward the ridge. When the sound faded, Zeke stepped back inside. Clara was still on the floor, her hands clenched around the knife he'd given her. "They're coming back," she said. "Yes," Zeke replied, bolting the door. "And this time, we'll be ready." That night, the house was a small island of lamplight in a sea of black. Zeke worked until his hands ached, moving furniture, checking the rifle, loading every chamber. Clara brewed strong coffee, the kind that keeps eyelids open and blood warm. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the dry yucca stalks. Far off, A coyote's cry rose and broke in the dark. Clara stood at the window, staring at the emptiness beyond the yard. "Why are you helping me?" she asked. Zeke didn't look up from the rifle. "Because no one helped my mother, and I've been wishing someone had." Silence settled between them again. Heavier this time, not the silence of strangers, but of people who've shared something they can't put into words. The hours until dawn crawled. Every creak of the wood, every shift of the wind, felt like a footstep too close. Zeke sat by the table with the Winchester across his knees, the lamplight catching the edges of his jaw. Clara dozed in the chair across from him, her head bobbing once, twice, before she forced her eyes open again. Just before first light, Zeke stood and moved to the window. The sky was a pale smear over the ridge, cold and thin. 3 silhouettes emerged from the dust, riding slow, deliberate, as if the whole town should watch. "They're here," Zeke said without raising his voice. "The pry—" Clara was on her feet instantly, clutching the knife. Her breathing was sharp, almost angry. "I'm not hiding in the corner this time." "You'll do as I say," Zeke replied, calm but firm. "We don't win if you're dead." The red vultures dismounted 30 yards out. Scarface walked forward alone, his spurs ticking against the hard dirt. "Last chance," he called. "Hand her over, and maybe I don't burn your house to the ground." Zeke stepped out onto the porch, the rifle hanging easy in his hands. "You'll need more fire than you brought." Scarface grinned, but it didn't reach his eyes. "We brought enough." The air between the porch and the 3 riders was a taut wire, humming with the kind of silence that made even the dust hesitate to fall. Behind Zeke, Clara stood just inside the doorway, her knuckles white around the knife handle. She could see the muscles in Zeke's shoulders shift slightly, the way a mountain might adjust before an avalanche. Scarface took 2 more steps forward, boots crunching the gravel. "You think this is about her?" His voice was steady, almost conversational, which made it worse. "This is about showing every soul in this godforsaken town what happens when you cross us." "You've made your point," Zeke said, lowering his chin just enough for the brim of his hat to shadow his eyes. "Now turn around before you find out what happens when you cross me." The 2 other vultures shifted in their saddles, restless. One, a lanky man with a crooked smile, reached down and tapped the butt of his revolver against his thigh. The other chewed a toothpick, spitting once into the dust. Scarface tilted his head, studying Zeke like a man examining a stubborn mule. "You were in Yuma once, weren't you? You know how fast a man can die when 3 guns talk at the same time." "I know how fast a man can die when he underestimates the one in front of him," Zeke replied, voice like gravel under boot. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Even the breeze seemed to hold its breath. Then, in one fluid motion, Zeke swung the rifle up, barrel angled, but not aimed yet just enough to make the 3 men stiffen. From somewhere down the street, a door slammed, and the sound ricocheted through the tense air like a warning shot. Scarface's eyes flicked for half a second toward the noise, then back. "This ain't over," he said finally, stepping back toward his horse. "We'll be back before the moon's high. You keep her breathing till then, if you can." The 3 mounted up, the creak of leather and the jingle of spurs fading as they rode out toward the ridge. Only when they were specks against the horizon did Zeke lower the rifle. Inside, Clara let out a breath she didn't know she'd been holding. "They'll come back," she said, almost to herself. "Yes," Zeke answered, checking the rifle's chamber, "and we'll be ready." The sun was sinking behind the ragged ridge, bleeding red into the sky. Long shadows from the fence posts stretched across the yard like fingers reaching for the house. Zeke moved with quiet precision, checking the hinges, reloading every chamber, cutting strips of cloth to wrap around the rifle's metal parts so they wouldn't clink in the dark. Clara followed his movements, wordless at first, then finally asked, "You've done this before?" "Not in a long time," Zeke said, eyes on the knife, as he shaved a splinter from a board. "But once you've stood in the doorway, with men coming for you, you don't forget how." He showed her how to load the small pistol he'd kept hidden under the floorboards, the one she'd never noticed. "Only if they get inside. And don't aim to warn. Aim to stop." She nodded, lips pressed tight. Outside, the first cry of a nighthawk cut through the silence. By the time darkness spread across Dried Creek, the town itself seemed to shrink into its own shadow. Lights were dimmer than usual. Shutters closed early. Folks had a way of sensing trouble and making themselves scarce. Inside, Zeke poured 2 tin cups of coffee. Clara took hers, staring into the steam. "When I was little," she began softly, "my mother told me the women in our family were like cactus ugly to some, but able to survive where nothing else could." Zeke sat down across from her, elbows on the table. Sounds like she knew what she was talking about. "I never thought I'd have to prove it," Clara said, her voice almost breaking before she swallowed the tremor. They drank in silence, each listening for sounds beyond the walls. Every creak of wood, every distant hoofbeat, every shift of the wind seemed sharper. Near midnight, Zeke stepped outside, letting his eyes adjust to the moonlight. In the distance, a faint glimmer of campfire danced just beyond the ridge. He could almost hear the low murmur of voices carried by the wind. They were out there, biding their time. When he came back in, Clara had moved the table against the front door and stacked sacks of flour beside it. She glanced at him, figured it couldn't hurt. He gave a single nod. Good thinking. The rest of the night passed in uneasy quiet. Zeke dozed in the chair by the window, rifle across his lap. Clara lay on the couch, eyes closed but far from asleep. Just before dawn, the wind shifted, carrying the smell of horses and leather straight to the house. Zeke's eyes snapped open. He stood, scanning the pale horizon, and saw them 3 dark shapes, moving slow, deliberate, coming down the ridge toward Dried Creek. The day had begun, and with it, the reckoning. Dawn broke cold and pale, the kind of light that made the desert look like it had never been touched by warmth. Zeke stood on the porch, rifle in hand, watching the 3 riders close the distance. Dust rose behind them in thin ribbons, curling in the morning breeze. Scarface was in front, his horse a black stallion that seemed carved from shadow. The 2 flanking him were lean, restless, scanning the land as if expecting gun barrels to sprout from the dirt. They reined up a dozen paces from the porch. For a long moment, nothing moved except the steam rising from the horse's flanks. "Mornin'," Scarface drawled, voice carrying like gravel down a tin roof. "Figured we'd skip the polite knock today." Zeke didn't move from the top step. "You're trespassing." "That's so." Scarface's eyes narrowed against the sunlight. "We just want the woman. You can step aside, and this ends without anyone getting holes in 'em." From inside, Clara stood still as stone. She could see the edge of Zeke's shoulder from where she waited, could hear the hard steadiness in his breathing. "Not gonna happen," Zeke said, the words flat as the land behind him. One of the men spat into the dirt. "You willing to die for a woman like that?" Zeke's jaw tightened. "I don't measure worth the way you do." Scarface chuckled low, shaking his head. "That's the thing about folks like you always thinking you can fight the tide. But tides drown stubborn men." Dargo. His hand drifted near his holster. Zeke shifted his stance, just enough to let them know he'd seen it. The standoff stretched. Even the horses grew still, sensing the weight in the air. Then Scarface leaned forward in the saddle. "Last offer. Step aside." Zeke didn't answer. He simply let the silence do the talking. Finally, Scarface sat back and jerked his chin toward the ridge. "We'll be back when the sun's higher. And when we come, we won't be asking." They wheeled their horses and rode off slow, deliberately leaving their tracks clear in the dirt, a promise as much as a threat. Zeke stayed on the porch until they disappeared over the rise. Only then did he lower the rifle and exhale. Inside, Clara was gripping the edge of the table so hard her knuckles were white. "They'll come back," she said, her voice a mix of fear and something harder. "Then we make ready," Zeke replied. "We don't wait for them to choose the fight." Zeke moved as soon as the dust of their departure settled. He set the rifle on the table, then opened the trunk at the foot of the bed. Inside lay a scattering of tools not just for fixing fences, but for holding ground. A small box of rifle cartridges, 2 boxes for the Colt, coils of rope, nails, and an old length of chain. "We're not waiting here like sheep," he said. "If they want to fight, we'll pick where it happens." Clara stepped forward. "You mean out there? On their ground?" "I mean," Zeke replied, "we make this place not worth walking into. Force them to step where we want them." He handed her the rope. "Tie this around the porch posts, waist high, loose enough to trip a man running up the steps." She hesitated, but her hands moved quickly. Years of carrying loads and working kitchens had given her a quiet strength, and the rope came taut under her pull. Zeke set to boarding the lower half of the windows with rough planks, leaving only narrow firing slits. The hammer blows echoed through the morning, a warning bell to anyone listening. By mid-morning, the small house had transformed. Trip lines stretched across the porch. Barrels of water stood by the door, not for drinking, but for dousing the walls if they tried fire. Nails jutted from boards angled along the sides, a crude but effective barrier. Clara came from the kitchen with a pot of coffee and 2 thick slices of bread. "Eat," she said. "A man fights better on a full stomach." Zeke took the bread without a word, but the corner of his mouth lifted. "You ever done this before?" "What? Feeding a man about to get himself killed?" She arched a brow. "Plenty of times." The humor was thin, but it was something. Outside, the wind carried the far-off echo of a hammer striking metal, perhaps from the ridge, perhaps just some ranch work miles away. But Zeke's gut told him it was closer. "They'll be here before noon," he said. Clara's face hardened. "Then I'll be ready too." She turned back into the kitchen and returned with a heavy iron skillet. Not all weapons need gunpowder. By late morning, the sky over Dried Creek was the color of tarnished silver, the kind that promises heat without mercy. Zeke stood on the porch, scanning the empty road. He knew they wouldn't come charging in without a show. Men like the Red Vultures thrived on fear. They'd make sure the town saw what was coming. From the far end of Main Street, a single rider appeared. Not Scarface. This one was younger, wiry, with a hat pulled low. He stopped outside the Silver Spur and shouted something Zeke couldn't hear over the wind. Moments later, a small crowd began to gather, men stepping out of stores, women clutching their shawls. Clara came to the porch, skillet still in hand. "They're parading themselves," she said. Zeke nodded. "They want the town to choose for them. Save them the trouble of fighting me." Down the street, the rider turned his horse in a slow circle, like a buzzard marking a kill. Then he leaned forward, spurred it toward the ridge. "They're signaling the rest," Zeke murmured. Minutes later, the other 2 appeared, Scarface in the lead. The third, a heavy-set man with arms like hammers. They rode side by side, slow and deliberate, letting the sound of hooves roll through the air. The people of Dried Creek kept their distance, but their eyes betrayed a truth. They were measuring whether Zeke was worth dying for. Scarface stopped 20 yards from the porch. "You've got until sundown," he called. "Hand her over and we ride out. Keep her and the town burns with her." Zeke didn't move. "Then you'd better bring enough fire." A murmur went through the crowd. Some looked at Zeke with a flicker of respect, others with a weight of fear. Scarface grinned without humor. "We'll see you at sunset." He turned his horse, the three riding off toward the open plain. Clara exhaled, tension leaving her shoulders in small, sharp jolts. They're giving us time. Zeke shook his head. They're giving the town time to turn on us. By mid-afternoon, the town had taken sides, though no one said it outright. At the general store, Zeke caught the tail end of a conversation. Two ranchers leaned against a barrel of oats, speaking low but not low enough. 3 men against 1, the taller one muttered. Ain't worth burning for. The others spat into the sawdust. If Turner'd just hand her over, we'd be done with it. She ain't even one of us. Zeke stepped past without a word. He'd heard enough to know that by sunset, they might not have to face the vultures alone. The town might do the job for them. When he returned to the house, Clara was by the window, watching 2 boys throw stones at a stray dog. They know, she said. Yeah, Zeke replied, setting down the sack of flour. They're just deciding what to do with it. The afternoon dragged. Heat pressed down, slowing every movement, making every creak in the wood seem louder. At one point, Mrs. Hargrove from the boarding house came by with a basket of bread. She set it on the porch without knocking, her eyes darting toward the street, as if afraid to be seen lingering. Clara picked up the loaf. They're scared. Fear makes people do 2 things, Zeke said, run or point. Toward evening, a group of 5 men appeared on the road led by Sheriff Danner. His badge caught the last of the sun, flashing once like a warning. Turner, the sheriff called, stopping a few yards from the porch. We've been talking. Zeke crossed his arms. That's so. We can't risk the whole town over one person, Danner said. His tone was calm, but his jaw was tight. If you give her up, no one else has to die. She's not yours to give, Zeke replied. Danner sighed. She's not yours either. Think about it, Turner. Think about what's best for everyone. The men stood there a moment longer, the air between them thick as the dust under their boots. Then they turned and walked away, leaving the unspoken threat behind. When they were gone, Clara stepped out. They'll try again before dark. Zeke nodded. Let them. I'm not moving her. The hours between late afternoon and dusk were the slowest Zeke had ever known. The sun hung heavy over Dried Creek, its light turning the dust into molten gold. Every creak of the porch board sounded like a gun cocking. Every gust of wind rattling the tin roof felt like a knock at the door. Clara kept herself busy, or tried to. She cleaned the same pot 3 times, folded and refolded the same dish towel, moved from window to window as if the view might change. Zeke sat at the table, sharpening his knife in steady, deliberate strokes. The sound was like a clock counting down. Just before sunset, a shadow moved at the end of the street. Not the vultures, not yet, but 2 men from the livery, walking slow, glancing toward the house and then away when they saw Zeke's silhouette in the doorway. They crossed to the other side of the street, disappearing behind the blacksmith shop. Clara noticed. They're circling. They're measuring, Zeke said without looking up. Like buzzards do before they drop. The light thinned, bleeding into that gray-blue hour when the town seemed to hold its breath. Far off, a coyote yipped, answered by another. Then, silence again. Zeke rose, checked the rifle leaning in the corner, loaded it with practiced hands. He handed Clara a small revolver, its grip worn smooth. Keep it close. Don't hesitate. She took it, feeling the weight. I've never. Now's the time to learn, he said, his voice low but certain. They both froze at the sound hoofbeats, slow, steady, deliberate. Not the gallop of a chase, but the march of men who knew they would not be stopped. From the porch, Zeke could see 3 riders materializing from the twilight. Just shapes at first. Then details the scar, the black hat pulled low, the glint of metal at their belts. They didn't head for the saloon this time. They came straight up the center of the street, past shuttered windows and locked doors. The town had already made its choice to watch, not to stand. Scarface stopped 20 feet from the porch. "Last chance, Turner. Hand her over, or watch your world burn." Zeke stepped forward into the fading light. "Then I guess we're gonna see flames tonight." The scarred man's grin widened, but his eyes were cold. The other two shifted in their saddles, hands resting on their pistols. Behind Zeke, inside the dim house, Clara stood near the back wall, revolver in hand, heart pounding so hard she thought they could hear it through the wood. She could see his shadow against the doorframe, tall and still as a post, and knew that whatever happened next, it would be decided in seconds. The street was so still that even the dust seemed to hesitate mid-air. Zeke's fingers curled lightly around the grip of his rifle, not tight, not loose the way a man holds something he's carried half his life. Scarface's horse shifted its weight, snorting into the cooling air. The sound echoed between the wooden facades of shuttered shops. Somewhere down the block, a door creaked open just wide enough for a pair of eyes to peek out, then shut quickly. The town was watching, but no one was stepping forward. "You've got guts, Turner," Scarface said, leaning forward in his saddle. "But guts won't stop bullets. Last time, hand her over, and you walk away breathing." Zeke's jaw tightened. "Breathing ain't worth much if you've got to choke on your own shame." That made the man's smile falter for the first time. He straightened slowly, glancing to his men. One of them, a wiry fellow with a scar across his knuckles, swung down from his horse and started up the porch steps. Inside, Clara's breath caught. She raised the revolver with both hands, arms trembling but eyes fixed on the shadow growing larger through the window. She could hear Zeke's voice, steady and calm outside. "That's close enough." The wiry man froze. One booed on the step and chuckled without humor. "You think you're faster than me?" "I know I am," Zeke replied. For a moment the world shrank to the space between two men, the weight of the weapons in their hands and the knowledge that one wrong twitch would decide who walked away. Then the sharp snap of leather as Scarface pulled his reins. "Not tonight," he said, almost lazily. "Let him sweat a little longer." The wiry man hesitated, then stepped back down, mounting up with a flick of the reins. The three turned their horses slowly, as if they owned the street, their silhouettes shrinking into the violet haze of evening. But as they rode off, Scarface twisted in his saddle and called back, his voice carrying clean through the cooling air. "Sunset tomorrow. Turner, we end this." Zeke didn't move until they were nothing more than specks. Only then did he lower his rifle and step back inside. Clara was still standing by the wall, revolver clutched so tightly her knuckles were white. Why didn't they? "They're not done yet," Zeke said, setting the rifle on the table. "They just want us to think about it all night." The air in the little house felt heavier than it had minutes ago. Clara sank into the chair by the table, revolver still in hand. "Then we don't sleep," she said quietly. Zeke nodded once. "Number, we don't." Night slid over Dried Creek like a slow spill of ink. The street emptied. Doors barred. Lanterns dimmed until only thin lines of light bled through cracks in the wood. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote's howl carried on the wind, long and low. Zeke sat at the table, cleaning the Winchester by lamplight. Each movement was deliberate. Slide out the bolt, run the oiled cloth, check the chamber. Clara sat across from him, peeling potatoes in silence, her eyes far away. Every so often, her hands would stop, and she'd glance at the window as if expecting a shadow to slide past. "They might come before dawn," she said finally. "They might," Zeke replied without looking up. "But men like them, like an audience, they'll wait till the sun's low enough to make it dramatic." Clara gave a humorless half-smile. "Guess we're the entertainment." The wind shifted, bringing with it the faint scent of wood smoke. Zeke's head turned, his eyes narrowing. He stood, moved to the door and opened it just enough to peer out. Far down the street, beyond the last lamplight, a small campfire flickered the Red Vulture's camp. "They want us to know they're close," he said, shutting the door. "It's part of the game." The rest of the night passed in fragments. The scratch of Clara's knife against the cutting board, the metallic click of Zeke reassembling the rifle, the whisper of the wind through the chinks in the walls. Around midnight, Clara broke the silence. "Back in Yuma, when they killed my boss, I thought if I told the truth, someone would care. The law, the court, somebody." Zeke looked at her, his face unreadable in the lamplight. "And?" She shook her head slowly. "Turns out the truth just paints a target on your back." Zeke leaned forward, elbows on the table. "Maybe. But it's still worth saying, even if you've got a fight to keep breathing after." For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Outside, the wind died entirely, leaving the night too quiet. Zeke finally rose. "Get some rest. I'll keep watch." Clara hesitated, then stood, moving toward the small bed in the corner. She stopped, turned back, and met his eyes. "If they take me, don't follow. You hear me?" Zeke didn't answer. He only looked at her, until she turned away. By the time the first gray light touched the horizon, Zeke was still by the door, rifle across his knees. He hadn't moved in hours. The dawn was pale and thin, the kind that didn't warm a thing. Zeke stepped out onto the porch, the Winchester in hand, scanning the ridge where he'd seen the fire. The camp was gone. Only a black scar of ash marked the spot, and 3 faint trails of hoofprints led toward town. He didn't like it. Predators didn't vanish, they shifted position. Clara appeared behind him, wrapped in his old brown coat, hair tangled from sleep. "They're gone?" Zeke shook his head. "Number. Just moving." They ate breakfast in silence, stale bread dipped in coffee, the only thing warm. Clara's eyes kept darting to the window, as if she could catch them arriving before he did. By mid-morning, Dried Creek was restless. Men stood in doorways, hands in pockets, watching the road. Women herded children indoors. The air itself felt tight, like the whole town was holding its breath. Sheriff Wilkes finally showed his face, riding in on a swayback bay. He reined up in front of Zeke's porch, tipping his hat in a way that didn't quite meet the eyes. "Turner," he said, "heard the Red Vultures are sniffing around. You know how it is. Can't have trouble spilling into town." Zeke leaned against the porch post. "You mean you want me to hand her over?" The sheriff's mouth twitched. "I'm saying, if she's not here when they come, maybe they'll ride on. Save everyone the mess." "She stays," Zeke said flatly. Wilkes sighed, glancing over his shoulder like a man who knows the clock is ticking. "Your funeral." He touched his hat brim again and rode off, boots tapping the horse's ribs. By noon, the heat began to creep in, making the dust rise in slow swirls. Zeke kept to the shade of the porch, polishing the rifle barrel until it gleamed. Clara busied herself inside, but he could hear her pacing light, steps back and forth, stopping only when she passed the window. Then came the sound. Hoofbeats. Slow, deliberate, the kind that announced themselves rather than approached. Zeke set the rifle across his lap and waited. They came into view 3 at a time, riding abreast down the center of the street, Scarface in the middle, his eyes fixed on the house. The 2 on either side scanned the porches, their hands loose on their guns. When they stopped, dust curled around the horse's legs. Scarface swung one leg over and slid down, boots thudding against the dirt. "Last chance, Cowboy," he said, voice carrying in the dry air. "Hand her over. No need for anyone else to bleed." Zeke rose, stepped down off the porch. "She's not going anywhere with you." Scarface smiled without warmth. "Then I reckon we're staying a while." The town stayed silent, doors shut, curtains twitching. Somewhere far off, a dog barked once and went quiet. The line between words and gunfire had never felt thinner. The air between them was heavy, stretched tight like a rope ready to snap. Scarface stood with one hand resting lazily on his gun, his eyes never leaving Zeke. The other two shifted in their saddles, scanning windows, doorways, shadows, anywhere a rifle barrel might appear. "You're making this harder than it needs to be," Scarface said, taking one slow step forward. "We're not leaving without her." Zeke didn't move. "Then you're not leaving at all." A faint gasp came from somewhere behind a curtain across the street. Scarface's smile widened, but it didn't reach his eyes. "You got sand, cowboy. Shame if it spills out on the dirt." He nodded once, and the man on his left dismounted, boots crunching on gravel. The sound was deliberate, meant to echo, to remind everyone listening that they weren't afraid to walk into trouble. Inside the house, Clara stood pressed against the wall beside the window, her breath shallow. She gripped the kitchen knife Zeke had left her, knuckles white. Every sound outside felt sharper: the creak of leather, the metallic click of a gun's hammer being eased back. Zeke shifted his stance, his right foot planting firmly in the dust. The sun slid lower, casting long shadows that reached for the porch like black fingers. "This is your last chance to ride out," he said. Scarface tilted his head. "Number, this is yours." The man who had dismounted took another step, hand hovering above his revolver. Zeke's gaze locked onto the movement, the world narrowing until it was just that hand and the space between them. A door banged open 2 houses down Old Man Harris, holding a double-barrel shotgun. "Ain't gonna watch no vultures pick at folks in my town," he barked. His voice cracked, but the barrels stayed steady. The second rider cursed, wheeling his horse to face the old man. Scarface's grin faltered just enough for Zeke to see it. Trouble was no longer a straight line, it was spreading, unpredictable. Zeke's finger found the trigger's curve, his breath steady. The street had gone silent, except for the restless shifting of hooves. Every soul in Dried Creek seemed to be waiting for the first crack of gunfire. And Zeke knew once that sound came, there would be no turning back. The first shot didn't come from Zeke. It cracked from the far porch where Old Man Harris stood. His buckshot peppered the dirt at Scarface's boots, a warning more than a wound. The street exploded, horses reared. The left-hand outlaw snapped his revolver up, and the second rider fired at the old man. Glass burst. Harris staggered, the shotgun slipping from his hands. Zeke moved. The Winchester rose and spoke once clean, flat dropping the left-hand outlaw to one knee with a scream. Scarface spun, drawing with a blur. His bullet shattered a porch post inches from Zeke's shoulder. Dust filled the air, turning the world into grit and echo. Inside, Clara slid to the window ledge, elbows locked. She could see Scarface's shadow cutting across the sun like a blade. "Zeke!" she shouted, and when he shifted, she sent the frying pan she'd heated on the stove skittering along the floor to him. He snatched it without looking, raised it to take the next shot on iron. The slug rang off the pan like a church bell. "Back of the house," Zeke called. "Smoke 'em from the flank." Clara rolled to the kitchen door, slipped outside along the wall, breath tight, knife tucked beneath her sleeve. The second rider dismounted to finish Harris. Clara's voice snapped like a whip. "Hey!" When he turned, Zeke's round found the man's shoulder, spinning him into the water trough. Scarface advanced, steady as a metronome. "You think you can keep her?" he called. "Truth is, the town will sell you both for one quiet night." His next shot tore a notch in Zeke's hat brim. Zeke's reply was colder than steel. "Then they'll have to come take us." From the alley, Clara tossed a handful of stove ash into the horse's eyes. The animal shrieked, rearing, throwing the outlaw back. Zeke stepped into the opening, sighted fast, and fired. The second rider stilled, dust settling over him like a sheet. Scarface paused, eyes narrowing. Not surprise, not fear, but recalculation. "You got one," he said softly. "But I'm not here to win numbers." His gaze slid toward the house, toward Clara's shadow. "I'm here to finish a witness." The street held its breath again. Scarface flicked 2 fingers. The wounded outlaw in the trough dragged himself behind a barrel. Zeke counted breaths. 1, 2, then slid left to change the angle. The Winchester bucked. Scarface dove, his shot splintering the porch rail. The rhythm of killing pressed in. Measure, move, fire, breathe. Clara crept along the back wall to the shed, grabbed the can of lamp oil. She soaked a rag, twisted it tight, struck a match with her teeth clamped shut. Flame licked the cloth. She glanced to the window. Zeke was pinned by the porch post, Scarface inching closer, methodical. "Zeke!" she called, and rolled the burning rag under Scarface's horse. The animal screamed, bolting sideways, jerking Scarface off balance. Zeke rose, sighted click. Empty. He dropped low, thumbing fresh rounds with fingers that never fumbled under pressure. Scarface recovered frighteningly fast. He fired twice at the doorway Clara had vacated, chips of wood spitting like wasps. "No more kitchen, sweetheart," he drawled. "No more courts." He stalked toward the back, boots grinding glass. Zeke moved before thought. He crossed the open, grabbed the hanging bell string, and yanked. The tiny bells Clara had strung along the eaves erupted in a mad jangle, startling the last outlaw. His head lifted just enough. Zeke's round took him clean. "2," Scarface said, almost admiring. He backed to the center of the street, gun steady. "Let's trade then, you and me." Zeke stepped off the porch. The town watched from slits of light. Dust swirled around their boots. "Draw," Scarface said. Zeke didn't. He walked forward instead, voice flat. "Yuma, the baker behind the stoves. You shot him in front of the help because you needed someone to hold fear in their mouth for you." Scarface's jaw tightened, the only crack in the mask. "You weren't there." "She was." Zeke's chin tipped toward the window. "She told the truth. So you rode 100 miles to kill a woman for speaking." Scarface's smile returned, thin as a razor. "I rode to remind the world how it works." Zeke's left hand opened, empty. His right hung loose. Time stretched like wire. From behind Scarface, a door creaked the church. Old man Harris, bleeding but standing, coughed once. "We ain't that world no more." Scarface pivoted half a glance, half a heartbeat. Zeke moved. The Winchester rose. The hammer fell. And the street finally heard the shot it had been waiting for. Scarface staggered back a step, surprise flaring and dying in the same instant. The round had ripped his gun hand, blood slicked across the grip. His revolver clattered to the dirt. He stared at the red on his fingers like it was an insult. Then he laughed. Low, genuine. "All right." With his left, he drew a hidden derringer. Zeke saw the shimmer too close, too fast. Clara didn't think. She launched herself from the shed corner, slammed into Scarface's ribs with the full weight of a life that had learned to carry itself. The derringer barked wild, the shot punching a hole through the church sign instead of Zeke. They crashed to the ground. Scarface snarled, elbow smashing into Clara's jaw. She tasted iron, clung to him like a drowning woman to driftwood, and drove the kitchen knife under his vest. Not for the heart, but the meat shoulder and side places that made men slow. He bucked. She held on. Zeke closed the space in 3 long strides, boot pinning Scarface's wrist. The derringer dropped. Dust swam in the noon glare. For a heartbeat, all sound fell away, but the scrape of breath. "Do it," Scarface hissed up at Zeke, eyes bright with a kind of pride. "Finish it clean." Zeke's chest rose once, twice. He looked at Clara, blood on her lip, ash in her hair, eyes steady. She shook her head, just barely. "No," Zeke said. "We finish it true." He hauled Scarface to his feet and shoved him into the street center. Doors opened. Faces appeared. The sheriff, late and pale, rode in with two deputies who looked like they'd rather be anywhere else. "Arrest him," Zeke said. Wilkes swallowed. "You can't." Zeke's voice never lifted. "Arrest him for murder in Yuma." Clara stepped forward, jaw set. "I'll testify again." Scarface smiled through blood. "We both know how this ends." "Maybe today we write a different ending," Zeke replied. For once, Dried Creek didn't look away. They shackled Scarface with rope and iron, the deputies keeping their hands wide as if the cuffs might bite. Word ran ahead of the small procession to the courthouse, a lean building with a lonesome bell. People followed at a distance, drawn by the gravity of a thing that almost never happened here, the law moving toward justice, not away. Inside, the room smelled of dust and heat. The traveling circuit judge, a thin man with tired eyes, looked over the scene with the caution of someone who knew exactly how fragile order could be. "What's this?" he asked. "Murder out of Yuma," Zeke said. "Witness ready to swear." Clara stepped forward, palms damp, voice steady. She told it clean, flour on her sleeves, the sound of a gunshot, the baker falling, Scarface's grin, the way he'd watched her to make sure she saw. She spoke the part about testifying before, and how no one cared. Then she spoke the part about being hunted for telling the truth. The judge listened without blinking. When she finished, the room held that heavy silence. Again, the weight of choices. He turned to Scarface. "Do you deny it?" Scarface's mouth crooked. "I deny nothing. I just say it don't matter." "Here," the judge said softly. For the first time, Scarface's gaze flickered, searching the faces in the room for the usual relief, the wink, the shrug, the look that said the game was fixed. He found Zeke, Clara, Old Man Harris, 3 ranch hands, and a seamstress with a child on her hip. No fixed game, just eyes that had seen enough. "Sheriff," the judge said, "lock him in the back. Trial at dawn." Wilkes swallowed again, but he nodded. When the door clanged shut, a breath went out of the room like a wind. Clara's shoulders dropped. Zeke's hand found the edge of the table, steadying. Outside, the bell tolled once, thin and true. "Go home," the judge said to the crowd. "Come back tomorrow to watch." For once, nobody laughed at the idea. Night brought no peace, only a thinner kind of waiting. Zeke and Clara sat on the porch, shoulders almost touching, watching the courthouse lamp burn like a lone star. Dried Creek hummed with a quiet it hadn't earned yet. "You think he'll walk?" Clara asked. "Not if they look each other in the eye tomorrow," Zeke said. "Not if they remember today." She nodded, then laughed once small, surprised. "I never thought the town would stand with us." "They didn't," Zeke said. "We stood, and they decided not to run." She turned to him, eyes shining in the moonlight. "That's enough for me." He reached into his pocket and pulled out the white ribbon she'd embroidered. "Still here." He tied it around his wrist. "For me too." Near dawn, a hard sound broke the thin quiet, the sharp clink of metal where there should have been wood. Zeke was on his feet before the second noise. From the courthouse alley, a shadow peeled loose. "Stay," Zeke said, and moved like he had a string tied to the danger. By the time he reached the corner, a deputy lay groaning, a keyring missing, and the back door stood ajar. Scarface limped into the street, one hand bound, the other free and red. He saw Zeke and smiled with half his mouth. "Couldn't wait." "Don't," Zeke said. But Scarface didn't run. He raised his voice instead, so the town would hear. "A world where a baker's death matters and a woman's word stands," he called. "You sure you want that, Dried Creek?" Windows opened. Boots hit floors. The judge stepped out onto the courthouse. Steps in his shirt sleeves, hair askew. Back inside, he ordered. Scarface turned, measured the distance, looked back at Zeke. "Let's finish our lesson," he said, and drew. The dawn cracked again. 2 shots overlapped Scarface's first. Zeke's half a breath behind. Zeke's hat flew. Heat kissed his scalp. His own round hit low, tearing Scarface's leg from under him. The outlaw crashed to one knee, teeth bared in either pain or glee. With Scarface, it was hard to tell. Clara came running despite what Zeke had said. Skirts gathered, knife gone. She'd left it on the porch. She skidded to the judge's side instead, hand on the rail, voice clear. "Everyone sees him. Everyone sees me." The judge nodded once, as if that mattered more than any bullet. "We see." Scarface tried to rise, and couldn't. He looked around at the faces. Harris, bandaged. Wilkes, ashen but present. The seamstress with her child. A ranch hand with dust in his hair. Zeke, steady as a fence post. Clara, unblinking. The game was truly different now, and he felt it. He lifted his head, spat blood, and laughed again softer. "All right," he said. "You win your fairy tale." Zeke lowered the rifle. "No fairy tales, just work." They bound Scarface again, tighter, and hauled him to his feet. This time, when the door clanged, Dried Creek didn't breathe out relief. It breathed in, like something new was filling its lungs. By noon, the trial took less than an hour. Clara spoke. Harris spoke. Even Wilkes stammered through the part where he'd looked away before and wouldn't again. The judge's gavel fell. "Guilty." A sound rolled through the room, less a cheer than a release. Scarface stood, a strange calm settling on him. "Didn't think you had it in you," he said to no one and everyone. Outside, the sun burned honest. Zeke stepped into it and felt for the first time in years that his shadow wasn't alone. Clara touched the ribbon on his wrist. "Still here," she whispered. He smiled. Still. Summer rolled over the valley, and Dried Creek learned how to hold itself different. The saloon still rattled. The wind still carried dust. But the laughter on the porch didn't cut the way it used to. Folks nodded to Zeke in the mornings. They left bread on Clara's step without making a show of it. The seamstress asked Clara to teach her girl to read. And Harris fixed the bell above Zeke's door, so it sang true. Scarface went south with the marshal's wagon. No posse came to fetch him back. Yuma sent a telegram that said only, "We heard." It was enough. On a late evening, Zeke and Clara climbed the hill beyond the ranch fence. The sky was all copper and lavender, the kind of color you don't try to name. They sat in the grass, the heat still in the earth, her shoulder leaning against his arm. "You ever think about leaving?" she asked. "Every day," he said, and then after a beat, "And every day, I don't." She smiled. "Me neither." They shared the silence the way only people who have earned it can. Somewhere below, a coyote sang. The ribbon on Zeke's wrist had frayed at the knot. Clara untied it, smoothed it on her knee. With a small bone needle, she added 2 more letters, careful and neat. When she tied it back, the words read the same and more. "Still here. Together." Zeke traced the letters with a rough thumb. The wind moved across the grass, soft as a hand. "Let's build a porch wide enough for company," he said. "And a kitchen with 2 windows," she said. "And a door that doesn't creak." She laughed. "Never gonna happen." The sun slipped. The first stars pricked the dusk. In a town that had tried hard to be smaller than its fear, 2 people who refused the measure watched night come on and did not flinch. They were not a legend. They were work. They were present. They were still here.